What's up, everybody? It's me, Charlie Mack, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the next video for my series. So one thing that I love to do is barbecue, and in Texas, brisket is king. So what I really wanted to do was I wanted to do a video series on how I found success smoking brisket. Brisket is difficult because it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it's a whole process. So what I wanted to do was break this up into 3 different videos. And so for this video, we're gonna look at how to find a good brisket and how to trim it and how to season it. So let's do it. All right, so first of all, let's talk about how to get a good brisket. So brisket is a big hunk of meat. It's generally pretty tough. And so in order to cook it really well, you have to cook it low and slow. So this is about an 18-pound brisket from Heb. And as you see, it's a big old slab of beef, okay? So what I'm gonna do first is talk about how to find a good brisket. You want your brisket to have a decent amount of fat. You want it to have a good marbling in between the red. And then from there, you want it to be big enough to where you're gonna be able to feed at least a couple of people, right? Like a small party. So this is around 18 pounds. To me, that's a really good size brisket. You can do a smaller size as well, but for me, I think this is a good size. So let's go ahead and take it out of the plastic, and then we're gonna go ahead and show you how to trim it. All right, guys, so here's our brisket out of the plastic. I have already kind of washed off all the blood and patted it dry. So brisket has a lot of fat on it, as you can see. So what we really want to do is we want to trim off all the excess fat on this, and then just really get it to about a 1/4 inch on top. And then there's also another big hunk of fat that we're going to cut off called the decal. In order to do that, I'm just gonna use a nice little fillet knife. It's pretty sharp. You can get this off of Amazon for like 10 bucks. But really what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna start going across the brisket and finding spots where I'm gonna go ahead and trim off all this fat. Now this is a pretty big brisket, so there's gonna be a lot of fat that I'm gonna trim off of this. So when you're doing that, make sure that your brisket is cold, because if you are going to trim a brisket that's warm, the fat is going to be all squishy and it's going to be really tough for you to do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start cutting down on this brisket. So you see this part, you want to just start cutting off all those excess parts that are just dangling along. Those aren't going to be any good anyway. And then you really want the brisket to have a good shape too. You want it to be really round on all sides. And so then from there, I'm going to just turn this around. And as I turn it around, you see there's just all these big areas of excessive fat. And so this is a process. So you're gonna wanna really just take your time and just start getting rid of this fat. It's like I said, it's gonna take a little while, but make sure your knife is sharp, make sure the brisket is cold, and then you're just gonna start chipping away at it, right? So you see how we're starting to chip away at that fat. I'm gonna go ahead and cut off a big piece of fat right here at the bottom. Right there. There we go. You wanna make sure that you have your corners trimmed, like so. All right, so I flipped the brisket over. So now what I want to do is go ahead and get rid of any of these pieces that have like a little brown on them. get rid of that. If you see any brown, you don't want that, right? I'm just gonna trim away from here. Okay, now as you can see right here, there's this humongous hunk of fat. This is called the decal. So we don't want this. This is like hard fat. So we're gonna go ahead and cut into this brisket and we're gonna get rid of this. You don't want any hard fat because that's just gonna not be anything that you want to eat. Okay, so we cut that part off. Now there's more. So I'm almost gonna be like a little surgeon here. And I'm gonna dig in there. Notice that my knife is sharp. I really just wanna get this big old hunk of fat out. Be careful though. You know, you wanna make sure that you keep all your fingers. Make sure you know where your fingers are. It's not a race. See, look at that big old hunk of fat. You don't want that. Get that out of here. It's not a race, but at the same time, you don't want to take too long because the longer that you wait, the warmer that your meat gets to room temperature. And once that fat starts to warm up, then it becomes harder to cut, right? So what I'm gonna do is just for the rest of this, I'm just gonna look for any hard fat and I'm gonna cut it off. All right, so as you can see, I've cut off a lot of the hard fat. We still got some more in there. So you can spend like a lot of time doing this, or you can spend a little bit of time. But what I will say from experience is the more fat that you leave on there, and I'm talking about like hard fat, that's not gonna really render down into like a bite that you're gonna wanna eat. So especially if you're doing this at first, take your time. Like this part, it's like a little hard piece of bone right there. Typically you won't find too much of that on there, but I'm gonna make sure that I get rid of that. But especially when you're doing this for the first couple of times, take your time with it. Know what I'm saying? And make sure you do it right to the best of your ability. All right, so on this other side, you have what's called silver skin. So this stuff right here, notice how this is red and this is kind of pink. So like this is other silver skin fat. So you're gonna also wanna trim this off. Now this is on the bottom of the brisket. So typically you wanna make sure you get rid of all that, at least most of that fat that's on the bottom of the brisket. So like you want the majority of the brisket to be red like this. All right, so I've gotten pretty much all of the silver skin off the bottom of this. So really the last part is trimming up the fat on the top of the brisket. So I know a lot of people that I've learned from say about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and try my best to do that. If it's, you know, a little bit under or a little bit over, it's okay. But you wanna try to get it around that amount. You don't want a big hunk, a layer of fat on top. But you also don't want too little fat either, otherwise it's gonna dry out. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now and just start shaving off the fat on top. Okay guys, so as you can see, I have trimmed off pretty much most of the excess fat on this brisket. Now this is the bottom half of the brisket. Let me show you the top half. This is the top half of the brisket, right? So you want your brisket to be nice and smooth. You don't want any parts like poking up or anything. But really what I tried to do is I tried to cut off all the hard fat, all the silver skin, and then I have a nice about 1/4 inch, a little bit less in some areas, bit of fat on top. And then this is what's gonna keep the brisket moist as you're cooking it. I'll show you the other side as well. This is hard work at first, I'm not even gonna lie, but I tell you what, it takes practice, just like anything. But watch lots of videos from different people and really just learn from them. And really, you just gotta do it. But the biggest things, the biggest tips I'll tell you, make sure your brisket is cold. Make sure you have a sharp fillet knife. You can even use the slicing knife that I slice my brisket with for big parts if you want. But really just trying to trim all that out. And then the other big thing is make sure that you cut off the decal. The decal is this big old hunk of fat. Oh, that's a big guy. It's a big old hunk of fat that runs right here. So you want to make sure that you cut that part off. But really, as you can see, after a lot of hard work, this is what a trimmed brisket is going to look like. Now we're ready for one of my favorite parts, which is seasoning it up. All right, guys. So now that we've gotten like the hard part out of the way, now we're gonna be ready to season it. Definitely the trimming, you need to have like a beer or two, watch the Astros or your favorite team, because it's some work. All right, but now we're ready to season it up. So let me show you how to do that. Okay guys, so when you're seasoning your brisket, you wanna use a binder. So I just use some olive oil spray. That helps my rubs stick, all right? But let me go ahead and tilt down and show you what to do, all right? So here we go. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go, this is the bottom of the brisket, by the way. Season the bottom first, then the top. So I'm gonna go ahead and coat my brisket with some olive oil spray. I've seen some dudes use like mustard and all kinds of stuff, but really for me, olive oil, that works. Now, traditional brisket calls for 50% salt, 50% pepper. I could totally do that, but I really love this Heb Brisket Seasoning. This stuff is the bomb. So I'm gonna use some of this. I'm gonna do a coating of this on there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start coating with my Heb Brisket Seasoning. This stuff is really good. It gives it a good color. It's got a really good flavor to it. Just really a nice rub. So I'm gonna go ahead and coat with that. And then the other one that I really like is this Hardcore Carnivore Black. And the reason why I like this is because it literally is a black seasoning, but the color actually gives a really nice bark. And so what is bark? Bark is like the crust that's on the outside of the brisket. So like, as you can see, you're like, whoa, like that brisket is changing color, right? So then now I'm gonna start getting the sides. Okay, so you want to get your sides going. And I'm gonna go ahead and coat some of this on there as well. And I'm gonna rub the brisket around on this whole cutting board just to get it even, right? But as you can see, that's what it looks like, right? So now I'm gonna go ahead and flip it over. Okay, so same thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray it down with my olive oil binder. Okay, then I'm gonna run through the Heb brisket rub. Now, like I said, if you want to be as traditional as can be, use salt and pepper. That's the traditional style. But once you get to where you've been doing this for a little while, you kind of like to try new things, right? And I'm kind of like that guy. So really it's all about using different things and then finding what you like. There's so many different rubs out there, so many different combinations of seasoning, and you just have to find what you like. So anyways, go ahead and do that. Make sure you get every little crevice. No piece of meat left unseasoned. Boom. Okay. I'm gonna roll some in this little cavity right here. There we go. All right, last step is I'm just gonna roll this thing and toss it around on this cutting board. I wanna get every piece of the brisket covered in rub. And really, once you do that, it's just gonna look really cool. All right, so now, that's why I love that hardcore carnivore black, because it already looks like it's been cooking, but it hasn't, right? So there's that Heb brisket seasoning, along with the hardcore carnivore black. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and put this in a pan, and I'm gonna put this in the fridge, because I'm gonna cook this tomorrow morning. All right? All right, guys. So we finished up trimming our brisket, getting all that fat off that we didn't want, leaving a little bit, of course, right? That was the hard part. I'm like sweating. And then after that, we seasoned it with your favorite rub, right? So that's the first step. All right, so now the brisket is ready to actually throw on the pit, but the work has just begun. So in my next video, I'm gonna show you guys how I go ahead and start my fire up, get my temperature right, and then actually go through the cooking process, the long cooking process of the brisket. This is Charlie Mack, peace out.